Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Alain. You know, I'm drinking out of It's Good to Have Friends mug because I have a longtime friend on the show you can see today. Way back in the 1980s when I was in the Army, I bought this book. I thought, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. And so I read this book. I've read a few others, and these are only a few. There's more. But after the first couple books, I wrote a letter because that's what we did back then. And Marc wrote a letter back. And then it went to phone calls and it went to meeting in person. And we've been friends since the early 90s. So it is good to have friends. And it is good to have Marc MacYoung on the show with us. As you can see, prolific author in the world of safety and self-defense. One of the earliest authors to really tell it like it is as far as real world violence. And so I want to welcome Marc MacYoung to the show today. And Marc, I'd like you to just give a brief introduction about yourself and especially what you're up to today.
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me. Well, let's see. I grew up in Los Angeles and Venice, to be specific, and that was a really rough neighborhood. So I also grew up between opposing gang territories. So I ended up with a lot of practice with hands-on stuff and other types of violence and crime and all that stuff. Well, after being a bit of a rake in my youth, let's put it that way, my stepdad, or the man who would be my stepdad, was a retired FBI agent. And he got me to change sides. So I often joke about this. It's like, wait, I can get paid for getting hit? I've been doing it for free. Wow, who knew? And that started me, down that line of work. And then came a situation where a couple of people were being stalked by a criminal family. And they called me in to teach them about safety. And while I was there, I got tired of repeating myself because more and more people were asking me. So I sat down and I decided I would write a handbook, one little handbook, tiny little handbook about stuff I kept on having to say. And when I sat down at the computer, next thing I knew, I had a book. And well, what, 21 books, 23 books, I don't even know how many videos since that time. I became kind of an expert. And well, then I got invited, and I use that term loosely, to be an expert witness in court cases. And that opened a whole new world to me about, before the cops were our enemies. And, then I was working security and such, and the cops could be right. But when I encountered the court system, that was a real eye-opener about how things went in our world. Latest thing is I had a stroke not too long ago, which really changed pretty much all sorts of things about my life. And right now what I'm doing is I'm writing fantasy and fiction. So that's keeping me busy.
You know, Marc, Dixon said good morning, and he wanted to know how you got the nickname Animal.
By doing all the stupid and dangerous things you have to do to get it.
Tim's here as well. Tim said, let me check my bank account balance. Tim's purchased a book or two or video from you and me and a lot of others. Good guy.
There you go.
Marc, I've been trying to really enforce the enjoy life safely because there's a lot to enjoy. And, just like, you and I, we've been to some of the worst places in Los Angeles area, down Southern California. But, if you go down and all you do is you go to Disneyland, you stay at a Disneyland hotel, walk across the street to the park, you're probably not going to run into any trouble.
Right.
But if you go to some of the places you and I used to go to, both working when we worked together in Riverside and when you were younger in the Venice area, then you might run into some trouble. And that's sort of some of what you talk about, and safety doesn't have to be scary.
Right.
It's choices and stuff.
Right.
So could you talk a little bit about staying safe and why it doesn't have to be scary, and why a lot of times it's choices that you make and the lifestyle you live that's more
Right.
important than learning physical skills and so forth?
Right. Actually, I'd want to start with what we came to call environmental knowledge. Okay, that's knowing what an area is, what are the common things there, and also the scheduling of an area, which kind of sounds weird, but there are like, I grew up in Venice, and on the weekends, everybody would go to Venice during the day. But about 3 o'clock, it was time to leave, to go up to, say, Santa Monica, and the the places there, because the night shift came over, right? So a lot of times, environmental knowledge is knowing the schedule of an area, like when it's okay to go there, when it's safer to go there, and then when the swing shift comes in, and at later when you're going to encounter real trouble.
Yeah, a bar at happy hour is very different than a bar at 2 a.m.
Oh yeah, exactly. And part of that is knowing these patterns and understanding what's normal. Genevieve and I wrote a book, and we came up with NADS: normal, abnormal, and dangerous. What is normal behavior for a place? Yes, yes. And that one was actually for martial arts training. Okay, what is your martial arts not teaching you about this? Well, what is normal for an area? A bikini at the beach is normal. A bikini in church is not. Okay, so you need to, that's part of the environmental knowledge, that you know what is there. And then you see things that are abnormal. Well, a lot of times people will see something abnormal and think, oh, dangerous. No, there's a really big difference between dangerous behavior and abnormal behavior. For example, there are areas where you will see weird things and it's normal. Okay, there's a guy in Portland who rides around on a unicycle playing sorry, the stroke is giving me trouble with my words. He's playing a musical instrument, bagpipe, while riding a unicycle, often in a kilt. Now, anywhere else, that would be weird. In Portland, that's normal, abnormal, because it's Portland, right? The thing is, dangerous behavior has really knowable and predictable patterns that once you see them and once you can recognize them, I don't care what icing, what kind of song and dance the guy is laying on top of it, you see the dangerous patterns. And that's when you go, uh-oh. And that's when you stop pretending, oh, it's not dangerous or anything. You look at it, you deal with it accordingly. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is the earlier you see something, the less you need to use violence, right? I'm walking along and I see two guys standing out, on either side of a narrow walkway, right? Facing each other. That is a typical robbery setup, right? Now, I could, nobody's going to tell me not to go through there. I am going to walk through. Or I can say, I'm going to take another route. So a lot of these things, and going with what you were saying about, living good, happy life while being safe, is just knowing when to make decisions earlier to avoid that stuff where it might go violent.
I want to say good morning to a couple people. Yannick says good morning from France. Jay and Vicky are here and say good morning. And
Good
Jay
morning.
said darn right about when you were talking. Thad said good morning. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And that's a great point, because I know some of the things that I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
I went, when I went to Bangkok, I purposely went to the worst parts of the city because those were the cool places in the tough guy movies I watched. But I don't do that now when I have a family and so
right,
forth.
Right. And I seem to recall that I had come up with the 5 stages of violent crime, and I got a letter from you saying, hey, they tried to rob me. It worked exactly like you said.
Yeah, that was back, when I did that. Got off that bus that early morning in Bangkok.
Yeah.
But so a lot of it is the decisions people make.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was young and stupid, just like you, we got into a lot of physical stuff. But how much physical stuff have you got into recently? Not near.
Number one, and okay, you and I work together. And the thing is, you saw me in action on the job. Okay. And although I'm famous for my violence, what made me good at my job was talking things down, keeping it happen. But there's also something else that you brought up. When we were younger, we would go into those places. We would go there professionally too. Okay. We had reason. And the thing about it is, we went in there with the correct mindset. One of the things when I was doing bodyguard work, getting dressed in the morning was a ritual that I'd go click, right? I'd get on the clock, right? And I knew when I was in this area, I needed to be thinking this way, or I need to have extra awareness. Okay. Now, changing later, I was working I was running a correctional center, and I was surrounded by more felons every day than the average cop will be in a month. Okay. So the thing was, when I went to work, I was in that mindset. And then my girlfriend and I were having lunch in Pasadena, of all places. Very nice courtyard, open air restaurant type thing. And something was bothering me, and I couldn't figure out what. And I was like, what's going on? And it dawned on me, there wasn't a felon in sight. I had grown so accustomed to being around felons that no criminals was a shock. Well, the thing about it is, for most people, it's kind of the other way. They're so used to not being surrounded by criminals that they don't know when it's time to pay attention that there are criminals present, right? So live your life, live happy, live that, but know when you have to pay attention.
Tobacco says good morning, and Tim said discard ego, and most safety is mental and not physical.
Oh, you just opened a can of worms.
Go ahead and expand on that, but just a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to have to take a side trip, and that is no comment about your sex life, but every night you go to sleep with a human, a monkey, and a lizard. Okay? Now, these talk about different parts of your brain, that the rational thinking human is here. The social scripted, much of our behavior is the monkey. Okay. And then the lizard is survival. A lot of what we think of as ego is actually coming from our monkey. Okay. He's the one who's concerned with like social status, how we're seen by others, et cetera, et cetera. And when the monkey feels threatened, it gets aggressive. Thing about it is, most of the time, the monkey is making a show about it. It's not really wanting to do it. It wants to get this result, but it doesn't want to fight. Right. So a lot of times what happens is what we do is we feel threatened. So we start kind of doing this monkey to scare the other people away. Like, whoa, you better not mess with me. I'm very dangerous. Right. The idea is to get the other person to back down. And that's where we start investing in it. Okay. The more we emotionally we get, because the monkey and emotions are, intertwined. The more emotional we get, the more dedicated and narrow our vision becomes on achieving this goal. So yes, letting go of the ego is easy to say, but it's real harder to do in practice if you don't have a lot of practice doing it. And what we're doing when we're hyper focused is we're hyper focused on monkey agenda issues. Okay. We're not thinking in terms of safety. We're not thinking in terms of, hey, is there a better way to handle this? Okay. So, yeah, that was the short and sweet version. Learn to take your monkey and go, sit down, let me handle this. Right. And then you can still do it while using monkey scripts, but you're in control of them. They're not in control of you.
Tim laughed at that. And then Joey's here, and Joey said, hey, Mark. Hi, Alan. I ended up taking Hapkido for a while after asking you about it on the list. Got a Chodan in 2014 before I switched to Southeast Asian styles. Hapkido actually really helped my catch wrestling. Great. I'm glad that you got to do the Hapkido because it definitely is a good complement to a lot of things.
Yes.
It has a wide variety of skills that you can learn, but it obviously no martial art is everything. And so combining it with what makes the best for you is always your best path.
And Joey's got a wide variety of arts under his belt. And the catch wrestling stuff, he did videos on that, and it's like, ooh, that's nasty.
Yes. And Tobacco Rose said, I think I'd rather be a cat.
Yes.
So, Mark, right now we're living in some crazy times with different things. You and I talked a little bit before the show about homelessness and lack of enforcement and budgets and different things going on. What is some advice for folks to help them just stay safe so they can go about enjoying good stuff in life?
What's most important to you in your life? Okay. That right is a good starting point because it's going to shape. You mentioned you don't go to these places anymore because you have a family, right? Most violence tends to be over social issues, monkey issues. Okay. So if you learn to control your monkey, and that includes like telling your monkey, hey, it's not worth it.
Like a road rage incident and those kind of things that are so people get all hyped up over.
Right. And the thing about it is they don't really understand how these things happen, and they don't understand how to use the off ramps for that, which is a different subject that's worth talking about. But knowing that people skills is the best thing you can have for your personal safety and to stay out of fights, conflicts, and jail, even prison. Okay. Knowing that is really that you have control over that. The other thing is knowing how crime happens, right? What it looks like, what level you're dealing with, because social violence is different than asocial violence, which crime falls under. Um, Crime has goals that are different than this. And once you know the difference, you know how to handle each of them, or you can learn how to handle each of them. And the best thing is, again, develop people skills, know when to use people skills, and then know what crime looks like, right? What the process, crime is a process. And once you know that, you can begin to see the early stages. And when you see the early stages, you have more options. Okay. Same thing with social conflict about more options. It's amazing how much, and a sincere apology will buy you all sorts of credit, free room. And on the other hand, if your ego is getting involved and you're saying, well, I'm sorry. No. Okay. One of the problems with a lot of social violence is, or conflict, is people think they have to win. Well, what does winning mean? Okay. Now, as a couple old guys with families, right? Winning means getting home. Not having grief, not having, I mean, that's winning. So if you're trying to win that away, that gives you a better, more flexible approach. But if your definition of winning is, I want this person to grovel and apologize, no.
Right. There's a few comments. Tim said, I found Marc in 2008, and he guided me through 9 years of dealing with violence-prone individuals on a lockdown unit. And he said he provided tools, instruction, guidance. There was a dessert for security professionals. I still cite he and others, Rory, Peyton, Alan, Lauren, all friends of ours.
Yeah.
It was a long, rewarding road to knowledge. So thank you again for keeping me safe every day.
It is my pleasure.
And mine too, Tim. And, Tim, I'm glad that some of my sources have been able to help you. And I know you paid me back, by helping me with some editing and some proofreading of Survive a Shooting, which greatly appreciated.
Oh, yeah.
And just glad that all of us could help you. And that's what we're all about. I mean, you mentioned Peyton, Lauren, and Rory, as well as the two of us. All of us are friends and have been trying to help people for years and years.
Yes. Yes. And having said that, you mentioned that book of yours about surviving a shooting. I love that book. I tell people, get it. It's the best book on the subject that's out there.
Well, thank you. And, it's sad that we need some. It's sad that we need a lot of the stuff you and I have taught people throughout the years.
I know. I'm aware of the, this is horrible, but, but helping people if they find themselves in the situation, other than when in danger, when in doubt, run in a circle, scream and shout, or as what relevant to the monkey thing, don't know when to monkey dance and when not to. And most of the time, monkey dancing is a no.
Right.
Because you'll just make it worse. Okay, so what else do people have to say?
Dixon said, a lot of this stuff falls under the police trainer's theories of twos. Hopefully you know what that is.
Okay.
And I mean, there's
my memory isn't what it used to be.
There's a variety of theories of twos, Dixon. There's one is none, two is, so which one are you talking about?
Yeah, could you be a little more specific?
And Tobacco Rose says, I've had a lot of problems with low IQ people. Accidentally insulting a dummy can be a real problem.
Yes. And again, one of the best things that you can do when it comes to people skills is learn about registers, okay, and have the ability to shift gear. Now, register is a communication theory about speech registers, that we talk to people in different manners. Okay, under these circumstances, we talk this way, these, and this, and this, and this. Um, as a friend of mine once summed it up so well, she had to learn how to speak "Hey man," right? Which is when you walk onto a loading dock, they don't do Shakespeare, right?
Right.
You need to mentally shift gears to talk to the audience, right?
I
And
mean, and
that,
that's a skill that, like a speaker, if I'm talking to a group of cops, I talk differently than when I'm
yes,
talking to a group of nurses or a group of teachers
yes,
in an elementary school
yes,
when you're doing speeches.
yes. As a speaker, you know that, and it's just, but
Now
start.
you're taking it out to regular interactions with people. Exactly.
Yes, yes, but starting with understanding registers is like you know how to do registers subconsciously, but bringing it out to consciousness, because poor people typically only have one register, and low IQ people also typically have limited registers. Okay, so that is knowing that up front, you can shift gears.
Tim said you all made a difference out here. Well, thank you, Tim. We
Thank you.
appreciate that. Dixon hasn't clarified yet what his theory of twos, exactly what he was talking about there. But, it's getting close to half an hour, which we
Okay.
talked about would be our end because I've got another meeting coming up and you got to get to work. But something I like to ask people is, what is something that you enjoy doing and something that you do to make sure that you enjoy it safely? Before you answer that, Dixon just did this. We'll do Dixon's, then we'll do that. Dixon said what Tobacco Rose said. The theory of twos I'm referring to is that half of the people on the intelligence scale are less than a 5 scale of 10. So basically another way of saying keep it simple.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. There are times you really do need to do KISS. Other times you can talk to people on a higher level. Right now, trick on drunk wrangling. Okay, is you can't reason with a drunk. Okay, but if you can't outsmart one, you're in the wrong business. Right. One of my favorite stories about outsmarting a drunk is I was bouncing in Phoenix. I was trying to get this guy, and he was just he was on one. All my tricks to get him out the door didn't work. So I looked at him and I said, "Look, I I don't care that you're drunk, and really, if it was up to me, I'd serve you until you're crawling on your lips drunk. But the law says we can't serve you anymore." And the guy goes, "The law's wrong." You know what? You're right. And the state capitol is right down there. Why don't you go tell them that? I will. So there I was standing there waving to him as he stormed off to tell them that the law is wrong. What I knew and he didn't was there's a police department right across the street from the state capitol. So yeah.
I have probably told that story as many times as you have, because in my communication lectures and classes, when I always do is when I met the guy that said you're going to need more friends, and I said, aren't you my friend, the Marine at that concert? I always tell that one, but I always say a good buddy of mine, Marc MacYoung, did this one night, and I tell that story as examples of getting your goal without having to go to violence.
Yes. Yes, there's many ways
Yep.
to do that. And the more of those you have, the better it is, because the less violence you have to do. Right? And violence means paperwork, and we both know I hate paperwork.
Exactly. Samuel's here, said thank you for Survive and Defend series and inspiring me to start my martial arts journey. You're very welcome, and I hope you continue on that journey for your entire life, because we can always keep learning and improving, even if we're not using physical skills on the job or for other things.
Mm-hmm.
Tim said Doc Thompson spoke like a hick to specific audiences to make himself appear to be less and not threatening. Genius. And he was the father of verbal judo, which I've taken verbal judo classes, read all the books. I didn't get to meet him like Tim had, though. So I envy you for having a chance to have met Doc Thompson before he passed away, Tim. And Tim said he remembers that story.
Have fun. Yes.
So as we wrap up, now the last guest I had, he talked about catching pythons in Florida, and how he did that safely. But what is something you enjoy doing, and something that you ensure that you guys can go and enjoy it safely while you're doing it?
These days, I really enjoy talking to people who know their field and asking. Now, in the old days, I used to play in vino veritas, which was I would get a professional, somebody who was really good at something, ply them with alcohol, and say, let's talk shop. Right? Give me the skinny. I don't need to do that anymore, but I really like talking to people and listening and learning from them. And a lot of that, how to do that safely, is to know, because I deal with dangerous people still, right? Is I know the rules of etiquette, and I know what will set certain people off. If somebody is in like this line of work or they're in this lifestyle, they tend to have these hot buttons. So I don't go pushing them. Right? And that really, um, the main thing is, like I said, I'm famous for my violence, but the de-escalation and the people skills. Well, changing that around a bit, the people skills and the talking is what I can do because I can do violence. Because I'm backing up. And when I was teaching cops, I would tell them 90-10 rule. 90% of all situations can be talked down. 10%, they're just going to go. Now, knowing that, you have to plan for them, you have to factor them, but they're not the biggest thing there. Now, in the 90% is just because something can be talked down doesn't mean it will be. Right? That there's some people who just can't do it. Or some people, and other times you'll encounter somebody that you remind him of somebody who did him wrong in the past. So you're not the one to talk him down. Somebody else is. But, the main thing is just talking to people and listening. Most people are really excited about somebody listening to them. Right? Like, I want to hear what you have to say. Right? And that, I can't tell you how many drunks I talked out of the bars, right, by just listening to them. Like, tell you what, you can come back, right? This is not a forever, which is an issue with drunks, but to make sure you're safe and you can come back, how about I call you a cab? And while we're waiting for the cab, you can tell me about your life. And and just on and on. And it's like, oh, your cab's here. Have a good night.
Listening is so important when you're dealing with potential violence, with conflict, to get it down. In my classes, I will make them do a listening exercise,
Mm-hmm.
and I will make them listen for 5 minutes each.
Yeah.
And a lot of them think that's a long time. And I'm like, no, yeah, you do. Most people think listening for 5 minutes is long, but in reality, when you're dealing with people, sometimes you have to listen for a long, long, long time if you
Yes.
want to keep the peace and let it resolve.
Yes. Yes. And, the other thing is, especially when it comes, you know what? If I listen to some guy, and I will include him yelling and screaming and howling and barking and calling me names. Okay. Go ahead. Get it out of your system. Um, I look at that, and we talked about having something more important, right? I can listen to this guy yell and scream or talk for, a while, and it's way cheaper than the $10,000 I'd have to pay a lawyer if I got arrested for punching him. I'm just kind of cheap.
Oh, I get it. So a couple people said some things. Tobacco said he buys and cleans and stacks Morgan silver dollars for kicks. Coin collectors hate me, but I'm ready for an emergency.
Okay.
And he said he also has dumbbells.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tim, and then he said, oops, B-U-Y, not B-Y-E. For the comment. Typos happen. And then Tim said, so thankful to see and hear Marc again. Thank you both for sharing your expertise with those of us that truly need it and could benefit from your journeys. You're very welcome, Tim. Appreciate that. Everybody, we're going to wrap it up here. Remember to go to enjoylifesafely.com, get your free ebook, get signed up for the newsletter. You'll be able to listen to the audio podcast of this again there, watch the video on the blog, any of that stuff. But also, Marc, please tell people how they can get a hold of you and where they can get more information and stuff of your stuff.
Well, No Nonsense Self-Defense is my old webpage that I've had for decades. So there's always that. And nononsenseselfdefense.com. My books can be found on Amazon, right? So that's pretty much, those are the two ways. It's easy to find me.
And all of your old Paladin books have been re-released with new covers and such, right?
Well, not just new covers. What I did is second editions, where what I did is this is what I said originally, this is what I've learned since, and this is where I was wrong, and why I no longer think this, right? So a lot of the newer books are not only expanded, but they have different perspective of, it's a very sobering thought that people talk about Bruce Lee and how good and smart he was. And it's sobering the fact that by the time, Bruce Lee was my age, he'd been dead for 40 years. So it's kind of like I've learned a thing or two in the meantime.
So awesome. And all of those are Kindle and paper?
Yep.
See, Amazon. So pretty easy to find. NoNonsenseSelfDefense.com. Other stuff. And you have a Patreon page there too?
Yeah, I also do Patreon where I do videos, and we kind of go off into the weeds occasionally with like really obscure stuff. Like right now I'm doing a series of how to spot a dangerous person. And it turns out that the first 4 of the videos have nothing to do with somebody being dangerous, but what motivates dangerous people.
Awesome. And Tim says, shit, ching, ching, ching. My bank account is crying again. Well, we appreciate you, Tim, and I'm glad that this information is helping you. Marc, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for everybody that came and commented. Thank you to everybody that's watching this on a replay or listening to the podcast. You're all appreciated. Go out, make it a fantastic Friday, and I'll see you tomorrow.